Welcome to the Tuesday, February 16th, Washington County Board of Commissioners meeting. Board Clerk Kevin Moss, could you please kick us off?
Thank you very much, Chair Harrington. The Washington County Board of Commissioners, also meeting as the Board of Directors for Clean Water Services and all other county districts, is now meeting in regular session, February 16th, 2021. Commissioner Fye?
Here.
Yep.
Commissioner Willie?
Here.
Commissioner Rogers?
Here.
Vice Chair Treese?
Here.
Chair Harrington?
Here. Great. We have a full complement, all 5 commissioners. Thank you. The first item on our agenda is oral communication. Mr. Moss, do we have any members of our community who have signed up to engage with us today?
We do not, Madam Chair.
All righty. Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. We have a updated change to our consent agenda. Item H is being pulled from today's consent agenda and will come back to us in the future. So that leaves us with 10 items on today's consent agenda, 2 items under minutes, 2 items under clean water services, 5 items under land use and transportation, and 1 item under support services.
Move for approval.
Are there?
Oh.
We have a motion to approve. Do we have a second? Second from Commissioner Willie. Before we take a vote on that, I want to, I mentioned during our work session that I appreciated the work that went into the agenda sheet for item A under clean water services. I also want to note on item D, I appreciate the work going into that because I know I cross that bridge many times each month. So just wanted to add those comments to our staff on each of those items. So we have a motion and a second to adopt today's consent agenda. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
And hand raise. The consent agenda is unanimously approved 5-0. Thank you, colleagues. Next, we'll move on to presentations. So Clean Water Services, it looks like you have earned a new award from the American Public Works Association. Ms. Taniguchi-Dennis, could you tell us more about this?
Thank you, Chair Harrington and Board of Clean Water Services. The team is very excited today to present this award to the board. We have 2 guests, Sheila Sahu from the American Public Works Association. She's the award chair. And we also have our contractor, Tom Paul, who's Mortenson's general manager, plus our project manager, Wade Denny, and Nora Curtis, our utility operations and services managing director. And with that, I'll turn it over to Nora Curtis. She'll give you some background information on the project itself. So Nora, take it away.
Thank you, Diane, and good morning, Chair Harrington and members of the board. It's my pleasure to be before you this morning together with the team members who made the Tualatin Interceptor and Siphon Improvements Project a success and this award possible. The Tualatin Interceptor was first constructed in the 1970s, part of the backbone infrastructure implemented by Unified Sewerage Agency to allow several small treatment plants to be decommissioned and to convey wastewater to what was then the brand new Durham Advanced Wastewater Treatment Facility. The interceptor served the district well for over 42 years, providing service to Beaverton and Tigard, King City, Sherwood, Tualatin, and unincorporated Washington County until current and planned growth in these areas dictated the need for a capacity upgrade. As I've said in previous presentations, for conveyance engineers, this type of large diameter pipeline project is often a once in a lifetime, once in a career type of project. For Clean Water Services, however, it is only the first of several large diameter pipeline projects that we will be doing over the next few years that will help position the district to be able to provide service for many more generations. In addition to the technical accomplishments, unique team, and delivery structure, which Wade and Tom will describe, the project offered some really nice examples of community engagement and communication. As you can imagine, a project of this size and scope is not only a source of concern for those owners whose properties are directly impacted, it's also an object of curiosity and a tremendous opportunity to engage and educate. We were fortunate to have a team that embraced this opportunity to inform people about our hidden infrastructure, its cost, and what we do. As one example, the team held weekly Coffee with the Contractor events for the public, which provided a great chance to meet the community and answer questions. On October 22nd, 2020, the Oregon chapter of the American Public Works Association awarded the Tualatin Interceptor and Siphon Improvements its 2020 Project of the Year award in the category of environmental projects that cost between $25 and $75 million. Here to present and tell us about the award on behalf of APWA is Sheila Sahu. Sheila is also a project engineer with the City of Beaverton, and we welcome her to today's presentation.
Thank you, Nora, and I can certainly attest to all the projects that Clean Water Services is doing that are help our community as well. So thank you for that. Good morning, Chair Harrington and commissioners. Before I began telling you about the award, I wanted to give some general information on APWA. So the American Public Works Association, it's a nonprofit organization, serves public works professionals. It's open to any individual, agency, corporation with interest in public works and infrastructure issues. It has 30,000 members worldwide from the public sector as well as the private sector who provide public works goods and services, including consulting services. APWA prides itself on its ability to provide educational and networking opportunities that help public works professionals grow in their professionalism and improve the quality of the life in the communities they serve. So why do we have an awards program? We recognize at APWA that a lot of really great projects, you know, they fly under the radar. You don't necessarily see them. A lot of the stuff, you know, doing into utilities is underground. So we recognize the importance of acknowledging success before we move on to the next project. And so we provide state and national awards to recognize that excellence in our industry. And we provide awards so that it instills a sense of accomplishment and provides that recognition and the desire for doing better and increasing your services to the community. And it also provides a great marketing tool. So as Nora indicated, this award was given in the environmental category for projects from between $5 and $25 million. And a few things I just wanted to touch on for this project and why it won is this was a really complex interdisciplinary project to provide wastewater treatment services for expanding urban growth areas. And City of Beaverton is one of those expanding growth areas that will need to be serviced. It was done using progressive design build, which I believe Tom will speak more about, to deliver the project and facilitate effective team communication, problem solving, and efficiency. And it's a gravity collection system that uses corrosion resistant piping, and it's expected to last 100 years. So there is some sustainability in that. It's a two-phase project and includes not one, but two siphons over the Tualatin River, including the King City siphon and the Cook Park siphon. And I believe Wade will be talking about microtunneling, which was done for the King City siphon, the construction method. And then horizontal directional drilling was done for the Cook Park siphon. So two different construction methods to do that. And this was a very complex project that included crossing state and city-owned roads, 30 privately owned properties, wetlands, city parks, and then finally connecting to the Durham wastewater treatment plant. And it was completed on schedule and under budget. So it deserves the award. And now I'll turn it over to Wade Denny.
Thanks, Sheila and Nora and Chair Harrington and the commissioners. I want to personally just thank you and the leadership at CWS in supporting this unique and successful project. This project required a dynamic group of engineers and constructors to successfully tackle the challenges associated with this unique project. Phase A of the project required the use of advanced tunneling technology that allowed us to successfully complete North America's first vertically curved microtunnel with a radius of 650 feet and a diameter 84 inches. Phase B was also equally as challenging. Phase B required us to disturb about 6.5 acres of wetlands and restore those wetlands. Along with that, we also had 2 challenging trenchless crossings, along with construction within the city's parks of Cook Park within Tigard and Jurgens Park within Tualatin. And we also disturbed 30 private properties. So we had a lot of unique elements on this project. Overall, this rapidly delivered project could not have been made possible without the use of alternative contracting through progressive design bid with our great partners Mortensen and their team of Kennedy Jinks and Caney Excavation. I'm going to turn this over to Tom now. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair Harrington and commissioners. I'm going to touch a little bit more about the tunnel, but first I want to talk about contracting for a second. And contracting is based on 2 important elements: trust and confidence in your partner. And the team was very early presented with a challenge of how we're going to get under the Tualatin River and not impacted the sensitive wetlands that are on both sides of the river. Well, our trade partner, Michaels, a nationally known tunneling subcontractor, suggested this direct pipe method. Wade kind of alluded to that. And it's very uncommon in the United States to use this technology, but very prevalent in Europe. So as a team, we sat down and did some planning and we said, okay, let's get this going. And so Michaels went ahead and bought a tunneling machine from Germany, and this 84-inch diameter machine arrived on site. Now, just to give you a perspective, it's 54 feet long and weighs 115,000 pounds. So it's a big machine. And so we did all this planning and we launched the machine, and 9 days later, we popped out in what we call the reception pit in King City. And we were within an inch of vertical and horizontal tolerances. A real accomplishment for a team to do such a thing. But what I wanted to touch on a little bit is the global supply chain that provided us with all these elements. So we went to Germany and bought a tunneling machine. And the only country that had a steering machine that would work came from Switzerland. And then we couldn't find a place to provide pipe. So we bought pipe in Malaysia. And since all these things are so unique, we brought craft from around the world, and we accomplished this all within budget. And I can't express the reason we got this done was the staff we worked with Nora, who provided a very eloquent bar that said failure is not an option. Don't forget, Tom. And Andy Braun, who brought leadership and mentorship. And then my partner and my friend, Wade Denny, who I worked with side by side to accomplish this. So this is a project that all of us on this call accomplished, because without confidence in one another, it would have never happened. And with that, I'll hand it over and thank you, everyone.
All right, back to me. So on behalf of APWA, I'd like to take this opportunity to present this award to Clean Water Services for the Tualatin Interceptor and Siphon Improvement Project.
Well, I think this deserves all of us to come off mic and clap, because this was a huge project. Your presentation from all of you was great in bringing it to life. So let's all give it a good, loud round of applause.
Good job, everyone.
Thank you. I was totally geeking out in all the information you provided. Shannon, did you have something more to present? No? Okay. Wow. Thank you very much, team. This was an incredible opportunity. And on behalf of the Board of Directors of Clean Water Services, I know we are very proud of the foresight that you put into this project, the tremendous execution the teamwork and trust and collaboration as summarized by you, Mr. Paul. I also want to thank you, Sheila, Ms. Sahu, for your participation in APWA, the American Public Works Association. It's always wonderful to have great women in science and technology and engineering participating in these leadership roles in these industry organizations. Are there any other comments from our board of directors that you would like to share with our team today?
Diane, a couple of things. One, thank you for allowing me to speak to the group. You asked me to speak to the contractors last summer in Cook Park, and I found that they were certainly motivated and excited. The only failure on this entire project was the name. We have to have something that people can pronounce. Something catchy, but beyond that, great.
You don't think an interceptor and the number of siphons and corrosion resistance and large diameter and all those totally geeky words are just not awesome enough?
Nora didn't think UTI was a great description of the project.
No.
I'm glad it changed its name. I actually was working at KJ when it was the UTI and it switched over, and I was like, yeah, that's a good decision.
Yep, that's great. Well, thank you again to everyone on the team. Nora, Wade, Andy Braun, to you, Tom Paul, and Sheila for being here with us today and helping us not only get this project done. I know you've been involved with your local work here in the city of Beaverton in Washington County, but also that we are able to recognize the success and excellence that went through this. So thank you very much. This was very exciting.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work, everyone.
Yeah.
Next, we'll move on to the public hearing section of our agenda today. We have two public hearings on one related matter, but we need to have each public hearing on its own right. And I'm sure we may have one combined staff report. So first, I think we need to have a motion to have the second reading of ordinance number 871 by title only. Do we have a motion to do that?
So moved.
We have a motion from Commissioner Treese, a second from Commissioner Rogers. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye. I see 5 hand raises. So Mr. Rapelier, if you could do that.
Ordinance number 871, an ordinance amending the Washington County Code, Chapter 8.04, Solid Waste Control relating to the Solid Waste Recycling Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rapelier. I see that we have Mr. Eggleston from HHS, our solid waste department. Do we have a brief staff report?
Sure. Thank you, Chair Harrington and Commissioners. I can give a quick verbal staff report. I'm going to try to combine both 871 and 872 so we can get through both of them. So this morning we are conducting a second reading and first public hearing of ordinance number 871 and 872. And ordinance 871 is an ordinance amending Washington County Code Chapter 8.04, and 872 is an ordinance amending Washington County Code Chapter 8.08. Both ordinances relate to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. As part of a countywide effort to incorporate equity considerations into boards and commissions, ordinances 871 and 872 propose changes to the creation, membership, meetings, and duties of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. Throughout the summer months of 2020, staff hosted several listening sessions with stakeholder groups, including the current committee, the Civic Leaders Program, Master Recycler Volunteers, environmental promoters, and the Washington County Haulers Association. Staff also evaluated approaches for incorporating equity considerations into advisory committees taken by other committees and agencies, including the Public Health Advisory Committee and Metro's Regional Waste Advisory Committee. In accordance with your board's equity resolution, Resolution Order 2030, Ordinance 871 and 872 intend to advance equity by promoting or providing intentional access and opportunity for community members that from historically marginalized groups to engage in the solid waste decision-making process. Proposed revisions included in Ordinance 871 include adding language to clarify the purpose of the committee, changing the name of the committee to the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee, increasing the number of public member positions from 6 to 9, reducing the number of solid waste industry member positions from 3 to 1, making the solid waste industry member position a non-voting position, retaining the HHS staff member position as non-voting, reducing membership terms from 5 years to 4 years, adding term limits to provide no more than 2 successive terms of membership, ensuring that recruitment and selection is open to all segments of the community and focuses on historically and marginalized and underrepresented communities, adding provisions that your board shall adopt bylaws governing the administration of the duties of the committee, and amending duties of the committee to remove technical terminology and more align it with its purpose. Ordinance 872 is closely related to Ordinance 871, except that it relates to Washington County Code 8.08. Many of the proposed changes included in this ordinance are complementary to those included in 871. This ordinance would detail changes to Washington County Code 8.08 in terms of adding language to clarify the purpose of the committee, changing the name throughout the code chapter to the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee, amending duties of the committee to remove more technical terminology and align it with its purpose, deleting references to past practices no longer happening, and noting that the committee details are included in Washington County Code 8.04. Staff is recommending your board conducts second readings on both ordinances and first public hearings and adopts the ordinances. Thank you.
Do commissioners have any questions of Mr. Eggleston's staff report? Seeing none, then I will open a public hearing. Mr. Moss, do we have anyone signed up to testify before us today?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, and with that, I'll close today's public hearing. What are the, go ahead, Commissioner Willie.
Well, as we have discussed in previous conversations about this ordinance, I'm in support of the ordinance generally, but I am going to, as I have stated before, I believe that we need to leave the industry representatives at least one vote on the commission or on this group, and so I'm going to read my amendment. I move to amend section 8.04.065 of Exhibit A of the proposed ordinance to reduce the number of public members in subsection A to 8 members instead of the proposed 9 public members, and to amend subsection C to remove the language that the industry member is non-voting and make the industry member a position, a voting member of the committee. That's my motion.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second to amend the ordinance. First, board discussion on this amendment. I know I have some key questions on this. Do any other commissioners want to go first? No? Okay, so here's my question on this. As the proposal indicates, the solid waste industry members do have engagement in this process. This advisory committee does not set rates. We have approximately 10 different companies that are involved in our garbage and recycling system. 2 are large corporations, Waste Management and Republic, that are vertically integrated. 7 are more locally owned and tend to be more in the garbage collection and hauling business, including Pride, Walker Garbage Service, Garbarino, Swatco, Hillsborough Garbage, West Slope, and Evergreen. And then rounding that list out is Far West Recycling as well. So we do have quite a mix of partners here. Our staff has a great track record of engaging with our industry partners, and that will continue. The intention here, as listed out, is to really work on the community level involvement, the consumer level of services, as well as community engagement. So what I'm struggling with a little bit is with the current setup of having 3 solid waste industry members, that seems to recognize that there are large companies as well as small companies, and at least one company that is focused just on recycling and not on garbage delivery. But what we have seen over multiple years and decades is that our industry partners really want to focus on delivering their service. And we don't have that much in the way of policy change as opposed to the service level of experience with our community. And so while the amendment of having one industry involvement is not unreasonable, I don't necessarily think that it's clear what objective is reached, particularly as the extensive engagement has highlighted that having industry presence tends to tamp down the community engagement. Although if it's just one player, then maybe it won't come across as heavily as having 3 voting members have in the past. So towards that end, I think what in hearing your amendment, what I have is a question for our staff, whether Ms. Angie, Ms. Kyle, or Mr. Eggleston wants to address it, and that is, what effect, given your levels of experience, what effect would having this one industry member presence and vote have on the intention of this community-based committee?
Yeah, I can try to provide an answer to that, Chair Harrington. So I think the voting status of the member has less of an impact on the deliberations of the committee versus just the number of industry members present. So the dynamics that I think we were concerned about that we wanted to adjust in order to produce more equitable outcomes were really the dynamics involved in multiple voices and that kind of tampering effect, like you had said, and the power dynamics that creates with the community members, particularly community members that come from less traditional, white backgrounds and are historically not less confident serving and disagreeing in these forums as we've heard and experienced in our open listening sessions. So I think that is less of an impact on the deliberations of the committee. The voting status of the industry members from our consideration is more of a there's potential optics for conflicts of interest. These are regulated industry. So that I think can be addressed in different ways to talking with the industry member about when they should abstain from votes, voting for taking a position that has a direct impact on their financial interest as a business owner would be a place where we would ask them to potentially abstain from that. So I think it is workable. It doesn't change the dynamics too much. And so I think we can work with it.
That helps me a lot. Thank you very much. Any other commissioners have any questions on this amendment? So we have a motion and a second for the amendment. We need to vote on the amendment.
Jerry wants to make a comment.
Well, yeah, I didn't want to make, I don't have another question, just a comment again. I think the conflict of interest issue is pretty much across the board. We always have to be sensitive to those things. And I think that's certainly doable just by asking them not to vote. Again, and the purpose of this, from my standpoint, is that I have to recognize that the private sector is also a part of our community. And so when we say this is a community level based committee. I completely agree. I like the modifications that we've done so far. But again, I just believe that we need to recognize the private sector is a part of our community. And so they should be able to at least have a vote out of 9. I don't think that's going to be a critical issue. So that was the purpose of my amendments.
I would speak to too. And Tom, this is not meant in any way to show displeasure with you or your activities, but I've always believed in any committees, it's good to have expertise other than just staffs. And so government is everyone inclusive. And so it's good to have somebody with some real expertise who can help guide some things. So I think if you have people who are completely without a good broad understanding of an industry, then it's always staff driven instead of public driven. So I would have even gone for 2, but I'll certainly support that amendment. I think it's a good one.
Commissioner Treese.
I'm curious. I didn't see public testimony on this.
No one chose to testify.
Right, but I didn't see any written testimony either. So I'm just clarifying that I haven't seen anything. And
Yeah,
that's correct.
Commissioner Treese, that is correct.
Thank you.
I just have a clarifying question to staff. I believe the term limit would apply for all positions, including this industry level one. So that is a way to make sure that we're getting a circulation of different folks from the industry. And Tom is shaking his head.
As it's written, that is how it's, yep.
Great. So first, let's take a vote on this amendment. Mr. Rapplier, given that it's an amendment to an ordinance, do we need to go through roll call or voice vote on the amendment?
Madam Chair, you can do just a voice vote on that, because it's just amendment, not the adoption. And the continuation will have to be at least 2 weeks from today.
Yep. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to adopt this ordinance as articulated by Commissioner Willie in the multiple sections. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye.
One second, Madam Chair. You're not adopting you're approving the amendment to the ordinance, not the ordinance itself for this vote. Correct.
Yes, I was summarizing the amendment as Commissioner Willie articulated. Is everybody clear on that? We're voting on the amendment. Everyone, please either vote aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay. Now, that was just on the amendment to the ordinance. And as Mr. Rapplier said, we need to continue this public hearing so that we can then have another public hearing on the modified ordinance 871. Is everyone clear on that? Okay, terrific. So in 2 weeks' time, that would put us at the March, I think is March 9th just the 3rd week? Thank you, Tom, March 16th meeting.
I think we actually have March 3rd identified as 2 weeks from today.
Oh, yes, I see March 2nd, actually. Tuesday, March 2nd is 2 weeks out. Great. We're all on the same page. So then next we have ordinance 872. Could we have a motion to read ordinance 872 by title only?
Moved.
We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers, a second from Commissioner Willie. Mr. Rapplier.
Ordinance number 872, an ordinance amending Washington County Code Chapter 8.08 Solid Waste Disposal Sites relating to the Solid Waste and Recycling Advisory Committee.
Great. And so now I'll open a public hearing on ordinance number 872. Mr. Moss, do we have anyone signed up to testify on ordinance number 872?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, then I'll close the public hearing. Commissioner Willie, as I don't have your amendment in writing, I need to ask, does your motion to amend ordinance 871 also pertain to ordinance 872?
I will need to ask for clarification from staff on that. I thought it was only 871, but Thomas, could you respond to that?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Willie and Chair Harrington. Ordinance 871 really lays out the structure of the advisory committee. So the terms and sections applying to membership and duration and term limits are all in Ordinance 871. Ordinance 872, the Solid Waste Disposal Sites Code, really just references Ordinance Chapter 8.04 in regards to the structure of the committee. It does not include any of the formal build creation infrastructure on the committee. So Ordinance 872 is much more related to the duties that committee holds in relation to solid waste disposal sites and not just solid waste collection. So it should not be a conflict if they don't need to be done together, essentially, is what I'm saying.
Okay, I just need to verify with our legal team, Mr. Rapplier, that we would be a-okay. We usually do, companion ordinances together. So do you have a preference if we delay action on ordinance 872 on March 2nd as well, or just proceed?
Madam Chair, members of the board, I think you can go ahead and proceed. I don't think it will change the, just because you're changing the, delaying the change in the makeup of the committee won't change the activities of the committee. So I'd recommend you go ahead and proceed and make a decision on this one.
Okay. Commissioners, before I take a vote, is everyone clear and comfortable with that?
I do have a question though.
Go ahead, Commissioner Rogers.
I understand after looking at it now a couple of times what you're attempting to do, both Marnie and Tom, but people we tend to put on committees after a while, they get comfortable and they'd like to also ask questions that are maybe more technical in nature. And I personally encourage that. I think that's wonderful. But is that the intent, or is the intent to say you don't get to do anything technical? You're dealing really more with public relations, outreach, and that sort of thing in the sector. I guess I'm really confused on that, because in the old days they used to look at rates and they looked at everything else. And I understand we're moving that, but are they precluded from asking those kinds of questions and being involved?
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I would say absolutely not. There's lots of questions that come up on the disposal sites. Let's use our compost facility in North Plains as a great example of that. So the types of things that the advisory committee would look at is compatibility with the neighbors, the community, evaluating, the types of feedback that neighbors have provided on the facility when they're renewing licenses and agreements. So I think that the amendments to 8.08 really just I would almost consider it more making it into plain talk. I think the commissioner used English instead of legalese or bureaucracies in our code language. So we're really we didn't really change any of the duties. We're just trying to write it out so it makes a little bit more sense on what it is they're doing. Less references to specific sections in the code and more references generally to the types of things they're looking at. So they would certainly be providing information and asking as many questions as they have about the disposal site. Presumably, if they're having an action item on a disposal site like the Nature's Needs compost facility, we would have the applicant in the audience, and the committee members, if they have technical questions, would be more than welcome to ask them and hear the answers that the applicant would have for them.
Madam Chair, I could just drill down because I think it's an important issue. So if I understand, you keep talking about disposal sites and those sorts of activities with the community, but if these members, as they become more familiar and comfortable, if they want to ask rate questions, maybe they're hearing from the community that the rates don't appropriately apply to certain circumstances they're encountering, are they precluded from doing that and they don't have a voice? So tell me how that would work, and then I'll get off the subject.
Absolutely not. They could ask any questions they want. We wouldn't necessarily preclude them from asking any questions. If we are talking about rates, we're focused more on the collection side of the industry. We don't set the rates on disposal sites. It's more of an open market approach and system. So we don't really have hearings on rates on disposal sites. On the collection side, we would bring rate review results to them every year, and the committee would provide a recommendation based on the findings of rate review. And we would have our CPA firm available to answer any technical questions if committee members do have them. So we would be welcoming and inviting that information and discussion.
And we've been through that process at least once in recent time, where we had a work session on June 11th, 2019. And then we had an R&O for adoption of that, of the rate changes, with a great staff report on June 25th of 2019. So as our staff went over then, it's pretty formulaic, but we continue to make sure that we have a good public process, so that we've taken steps to make sure that people are aware of it, that our advisory committee is aware of it, and that we have opportunities for people to comment, whether in those committees, those advisory committees, and or before the Board of Commissioners. Great. So we have Ordinance 872 before us. We have, I believe, through the discussion, I've lost sight of who made the motion to adopt the ordinance in a second, but I believe we had did we have the motion? Yes, we did have the motion and the second. So now we need a roll call vote. Mr. Moss on Ordinance 872.
To correct, Madam Chair, we had a motion on the read my titles only, but we did not have the motion to adopt this ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
I would move it.
So we need a motion and a second.
I would move we adopt, Madam Chair.
We have a motion from Commissioner Rogers and a second from Commissioner Willie. So now we have a motion to adopt Ordinance 872. Can we take a roll? Do we have any commissioner comments? Any further commissioner comments or questions? Okay, Mr. Moss, roll call, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Fye.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Commissioner Willie.
Aye.
Commissioner Rogers.
Aye.
Vice Chair Treese.
Aye.
Chair Harrington.
Yes. That brings us to 5-0 adoption on ordinance number 872. Thank you, commissioners. Next, we'll move on to the action item. We have one from Land Use and Transportation to approve the Washington County Transit Development Plan. And I believe we have a presentation from some staff.
Commissioners, Land Use and Transportation Director, and we should have Chris Steffenbach joining us online. Chris is just going to run through a brief review of the Transit Development Plan prior to your adoption, and then we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. So with that, take it away, Chris. Oh, I think you're muted, Chris.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, Chair and Board. Today, we're here to ask for your adoption of the Washington County Transit Development Plan. Next slide, please. Requested action is to approve the plan, and what this plan does is it identifies investment priorities for transit for the fiscal years of FY22 and FY23, and identifies longer-term transit needs. The plan documents the demographic conditions and other needs, such as where there are gaps in current transit services, and it summarizes the public input that we heard from the community on transit needs. The recommendations in the plan reflect the recommendations from the transit committee that the board appointed earlier this year. This is having a plan is required by the Oregon Administrative Rules to be eligible for the statewide transportation improvement funds for transit. I want to remind you that that we brought the priorities to the board for in November for review, the recommendations that came out of the committee, and the board gave a thumbs up to submit those for funding for the next biennium. Next slide, please. So just to remind you about the statewide transportation improvement fund, it was established through House Bill 2017. And the criteria for focusing on the transit improvements really are on improving the frequency and service reliability between communities, and really reducing service fragmentation and improving services to low income communities, as well as student transportation. Those are the top criteria. Next slide. Just a review of the development process for the STIF and where this plan goes is that Washington County is one of 9 different public transportation providers that have to develop priorities and submit them to the TriMet committee, which is called the HB 2017 Transit Advisory Committee, for then further support to the TriMet board and then on to the Oregon Transportation Commission. You'll remember that the HB 2017, when it established the STIF process, identified TriMet as the qualified entity responsible for coordinating the transit plans for these 9 different public transportation providers. Next slide. Just a reminder, Washington County receives STIF funding based on revenue generated outside of the TriMet and SMART districts. So it's really a focus outside of the TriMet and SMART districts. And then we also receive funding that is approved by TriMet's HB 2017 Advisory Committee for what's are called regional coordination services within the TriMet district. And these, we often refer to these as first last mile services. Next slide. The services that are funded by STIF really connect the communities of Banks, Forest Grove, Hillsborough, North Plains, Tualatin, and provide important connections between the rural parts of Washington County and back and forth into the urban area. And the county has contracted with a nonprofit, Ride Connection, to provide these services. Next slide. So we are fortunate that we had the benefit from much community input in identifying these priorities for services. We had great input from our transit committee members. We had the benefit of Ride Connections rider surveys that they had taken. Other surveys, such as Washington County's Division of Aging Veteran Services recent survey on transit needs, included transit needs, and our own online public comment survey. And we heard pretty consistent comments about the need for increased awareness of the existing services. Many people didn't know what was available. We heard a lot about the need for first last mile connections, and particularly for older adults and people with disabilities, more comfortable walks to transit stops and improved stop amenities. We heard about the need for better coordination with services from adjacent counties, including several comments about better coordination with trips to the coast and service improvements overall. And then for the rural areas, more efficient door-to-door service for those areas. Next slide. So we folded that into the biennial transit priorities. This is for fiscal years 22 and fiscal year 23. Maintaining the service we have on Westlink, which serves not just Forest Grove, but also Banks, North Plains, and Hillsborough, and includes adding additional service. The rural demand response, which we also call door-to-door, maintaining the expanded service area, and as well as piloting some new opportunities to improve the service, the efficiency and cost savings in these services. We have been working with the transit districts in adjacent counties and would continue to do that to improve that coordination in a regional coordination. Next step. Next slide, please. And then the rural workforce shuttle. This is a reverse commute shuttle from the Hillsborough Cornelius area primarily, at least to start with, to connect people who live in the urban area but work in the rural area. And not only launching that, which we'll be doing later this year, but expand and adjust as we understand more about the community needs. Regional coordination, this is very popular. The Grove Link, Tualatin, and North Hillsborough shuttle. We, with because of the funding concerns, the amount of funding that TriMet is able to give to us has been frozen at the current fiscal year. For the next 2 fiscal years, we are able to expand to meet community needs if we receive a grant through the STIF grant. We also include in our priorities funding for increased service awareness and marketing, improving the ease of use of information about the services. Next slide. We have, of course, administrative costs that we're covering and proposed capital improvements that will also help increase awareness about the services, and charging stations for the new electric vehicles that we purchased this last year. And then planning. So we will be back in 2 years for the next biennial improvements for fiscal years 24 and 25, and that'll happen before you know it. I think I do want to give a call out. If you didn't see the press releases last Monday, Ride Connection was able to expand services on the West Link, offer midday services in the Forest Grove, Banks, North Plains, Hillsborough route, and expand the Grove Link into Cornelius with additional routes, and expand the service area for the door-to-door services. So someone in the rural area can get all the way over to 185th and the Tannisbourne and more easily make more connections. So that just launched last week. So really, really excited about that. Next slide. Oh yeah, so including the unspent funds from the last 2.5 years, we anticipate about 3.8 million for the budget for the fiscal year 22 and 23 is being folded into the county's budget. And it's roughly about, again, the bulk of the funding is the regional coordination that we get from TriMet. Next slide. So next step in the STIF process. So a week ago, the 3-county public transportation plan with these priorities was submitted to the Oregon Transportation for all 9 public transportation providers. And the Oregon Transportation Commission will take action on those in the April-May timeframe. In June, we will be back with you with a request to amend our intergovernmental agreement with TriMet to receive the funding for the next biennium, as well as we will need to amend our Ride Connection agreement to provide the public services for this. And then in FY22, in 2022, we'll be back again to update the transit priorities for the next biennium. And we anticipate spending, including more, hopefully more, getting more funding for those regional coordination priorities because those are so popular for that first last mile connection. Next slide. Just any questions? And before that, I would just like to especially thank Chair Harrington for her leadership on the Transit Committee. That was extremely helpful. I'd also like to thank Julie Wilkie and her team at Ride Connection for being such great partners with us for all this work, and Erin Wardell's staff who really pulled this plan together, including Diami Valentine, Julie Sosnowski, and Reza Faruda.
I'll start. Great work, Chris, to you and to the other staff members who you've already listed. I'd also like to recognize our partners in working on this plan. Jolynn Becker from the City of Banks, Mayor David Meeker from Gaston was able to attend a meeting. Mayor Terry Linehan, the mayor of North Plains, was a very consistent participant. Rebecca Miller from our HHS DAVS group was quite involved. Anna Deanna Johnson served as a rider representative, and she was very engaged and brought some great comments to the table, not only for senior members, but also our more physically challenged community members. Deanna Palm participated from the Hillsborough Chamber, ensuring that we had business voice. Mary Ann Porter participated from Centro Cultural. Once again, good community engagement. Mahesh Udatta, we know him from some other transportation engagement. He consistently participated, as did Elaine Wells, who also brought forward many different great comments on the needs for seniors. We also had some consistent engagement from some other partners. Dwight Brashear, the executive director from SMART from Wilsonville, Brenda Martin from TriMet, and as Chris mentioned, Julie Wilkie Palmer and members of her team, really along with Chris Diami, really helped bring this whole topic to life, helped us be informed by the surveys, by the data that is available, so that we have this comprehensive plan before you. So job well done for everyone. It was actually fun, and we learned a lot from one
We did
another.
learn a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Commissioners, do you have any questions or comments? Commissioner Rogers, I see you're unmuted already.
Oh, I didn't mean to unmute, but I would say congratulations and good work. Chris, you probably would say this too. I certainly see a lot of crossover participation with the regional plan. I think the emphasis, not only with Washington County adopting a good plan, but on a regional level, it was some difficult sledding. We don't have a lot of money, and it's hard. I was lobbied heavily by both Tualatin mayor as well as the chamber down there, and I told them it was the last minute on a different pot of money, but I told them the last minute. Lo and behold, with great partnerships from Clackamas County, we had some connectivity now between Clackamas County and Tualatin. So different issue, different arena, but all of these people have put in tireless work, and thank you, Chair, for your work. I know that it was very integral to us all pushing a little different position. And thanks to Deanna Palm, she was also chairing TriMet's 217 committee, 2017, there we get it right. And I know that crossover is very helpful. So well done.
Thank you.
Are there any other commissioner questions or comments at this time? I just have one question for you, Chris. Now that we have this initial transit development plan, you mentioned needing to come back to this to review priorities for the next biennium. Since we now have this first ever transit development plan, will that make it a little easier and sort of a lighter weight effort?
Yes, I think it will be easier. And that's what I tell staff all the time, is that it's much easier this time than it was the first time we were going through this process. So I'm counting on this getting easier as we all get more experienced. There will be some new tweaks, though. I think you know the administrative rules are moving forward to consolidate the Special Transportation Fund with the STIF. And so there will always be something new.
Great. Okie dokie. Thank you. Well, so this is an action item. I don't see any other commissioner questions or comments at this time. Do we have a motion to approve the resolution and order to approve the Washington County Transit Development Plan?
Move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion from Commissioner Treese, a second from Commissioner Willie. Any last comments before we take a vote? Okay, all those in favor, please vote by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously 5-0. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, staff.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is our second period for community oral engagement. Clerk Moss, do we have anyone signed up to speak with us today?
We do not, Madam Chair.
Okay, then. Next, we'll move on to board announcements. And as usual, I'll kick it off with announcing our upcoming meetings. Next Tuesday, February 23rd, the month is almost over already. We'll have a work session that starts at 1 in the afternoon, and we'll have our once a month board evening meeting that starts at 6:30. And I think from the rolling calendar, we have a very full day and evening that meeting. Then following that, 2 weeks out, Tuesday, March 2nd, we'll have a work session that starts at 8:30 in the morning, a board meeting at 10, and that's where we'll have that new reading of the modified ordinance 871, another public hearing and action on that. We have a roundtable that Thursday, March 4th. The following Tuesday is just a work session day, March 9th. And then our last meeting of the month of March will be Tuesday, March 16th, because we have the school spring break the following week. So on Tuesday, March 16th, our work session will start at 1 in the afternoon and a board meeting at 6:30 in the evening. That doesn't quite let us all off the hook, because the very last week of March, we have work to do with regard to our county council hiring. So any other board announcements for today? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to adjourn this meeting of Tuesday, February 16th? We have a motion from Commissioner Willie and a second from Commissioner Rogers. All those in favor, please vote by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
That and hand raises, we have unanimity at 5-0. So we hereby adjourn today's meeting for Tuesday, February 16th. It is 11:09. It's been a long time since we've finished so early. Ms. Angie, would we like to try and get to one of our work session topics, or just reconvene in work session as planned at 1 p.m.? And Mr. Rapplier, I need to make sure, usually when we're in person, we're able to better take advantage of this face-to-face, I mean. I think this is the first time in months where we've had a good chunk of time before 1 o'clock and after our business meeting. So what are your thoughts?
I believe there's a date, time certain for one of the speakers coming in at 1 o'clock. So we have a problem there, but the other ones, with maybe some flexibility on. We certainly can do it procedurally. Work session, it's up to the board whether they want to do it.
The 1 o'clock item, Alan, you are correct. That is a time certain, and I haven't checked on the others. I could see, I just got a note from Stephen Roberts. Thank you for listening in, Stephen. He is able to do the first last mile presentation now.
Commissioners, would you like to do that? I see a thumbs up from Commissioner Rogers, Commissioner Treese, Commissioner Willie, and Commissioner Fye. Great. So Clerk Moss, I assume that we need to go back to this morning's Zoom link for that.
No, because the morning Zoom link is closed. So we have the afternoon one set up for 1. So we can just continue on this, and we will work with IT to split this portion out of it for you.
Mr. Rapplier, is that a-okay?
Yes, that should be fine.
And that'll work for public access? Okay. All right. Should we dive right in, or should we take a 10-minute break and then dive right in? So that all of staff can get here and we can adjust.
Let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay, great. We'll be back here in 10 minutes. Thank you.
On this link.
On this link, yep.
Yes,
So just
Commissioner
turn your
Rogers,
camera
stay
on.
on this link.
Okay.
Commissioner Treese, I didn't note the time when we took a
Neither did
10-minute
I.
break. Did you?
So I just came back to my office. Here we go. I think it's right now.
It is right now.
Well, it looks like we have all 5 commissioners, our CAO, I don't know if we have legal on yet, as well as our presenters, just waiting for everyone to come back on video. Stephen, are your team members available? Okay, so Mr. Moss, could you make sure that we're recording for our work session?
Yes, Madam Chair, our IT streaming service is ready to go, and we are back to presentations.
Terrific. Well, given that our board meeting ended just after 11, we wanted to take full advantage of this time slot. So we've advanced topic 4 from our work session agenda. So I'd like to welcome Land Use and Transportation Director Stephen Roberts and your team for the first and last mile transit access strategies.
Thank you, Chair Harrington and commissioners. And so this is actually perfect timing, really, because I think this is a good follow-on to the transit development plan presentation that you just heard. So in that, one of the key topics that came out of that was the importance and the benefit of improving first and last mile access to transit, as well as improving transit service. So all of these things need to work together. So I'm going to introduce Erin Wardell, our principal transportation planner, and with her is Diami Valentine, one of our senior transportation planners. So they're going to walk us through the presentation on this study and will be available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm Erin Wardell, Principal Transportation Planner, and with me is Diami Valentine, our Project Manager and Senior Transportation Planner. We are here today to give you a briefing on our first and last mile transit access strategies. Next slide. So through a number of other projects, our surveys, and our outreach, we consistently hear that Washington County residents are interested in taking advantage of transit, but they find that it doesn't connect directly to where they live or the places that they need to go. So the origin of this project was an interest in evaluating those first last mile strategies to get people to transit stops from their home or from transit stops to the places they need to go. We sought out and were successful in getting a grant from the Transportation Growth Management Program from ODOT and the Department of Land Conservation and Development. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Diami, our project manager, to go into the details.
Morning, Chair and Commissioners. So this was well-timed in that we have been presented an opportunity to, as a now transit provider, to support some of these services that we'll be talking about. But this effort really, the intent was to explore first and last mile opportunities and programs that were responsive and coordinated and flexible to the land use and transportation context. And in Washington County, we obviously have a variety of contexts that we had an opportunity to explore. And so this project really looks at infrastructure investments and opportunities for safer, faster, and more comfortable access to transit, as well as looking at and supporting and integrating innovative mobility options. And we'll walk through kind of what that entails here. Next slide, please. So the purpose of this briefing really is to discuss the findings of the report that I believe has been shared with you, and in advance of acknowledging the report and the final outcome of this effort, which is a required element of our grant funding. And I believe we're coming to you on March 16th to acknowledge the report, and then identify any kind of opportunities and board interest for further advancing some of the recommendations. Next slide. So this effort kicked off really the end of 2018. We convened a technical and stakeholder advisory group, which consisted of representatives from agency and jurisdictional staff. Internally, we had representatives from Health and Human Services, Environmental Health, and a number of other stakeholder groups, including Westside Transportation Alliance, which was a real key partner through this effort. We also have briefed the Planning Commission on some of this work, as well as this board on several occasions. And the initial effort included looking at our existing conditions and identifying opportunities and needs through really honing in on a number of over 40 different major transit stops, and looking at the opportunities within proximity, kind of a travel shed within those areas. We looked at best practices from other jurisdictions within the region, nationally as well as internationally, and then developed an evaluation approach to look at those programs and projects, and have consolidated that into a final report. We got a little bit waylaid with the pandemic, and so there was kind of a extended period of time that we were hoping to wrap this up sooner than anticipated here. So next slide, please. So we, as I mentioned, we did convene a committee that supported this work. We included a number of briefings with other stakeholder groups and community groups, including CPOs. We also held 2 workshops at the end of 2019 that included community members and employers. And then we had an online open house, which had a fairly decent response of over 320 responses, and heard some really interesting feedback. And so the final report really captures a lot of the key input that we heard from the community members. Next slide. And so what we really heard was that equity was a key consideration throughout all of this, and making sure that we're providing a system that serves all transportation needs and the needs of all populations, especially considering the needs of families and older adults, as well as trying to target investment opportunities where they were most needed. And one of those areas were multifamily developments. Affordable housing was one that was noted. Top priority was obviously safety, making sure that we're addressing the gaps in our network to provide safer crossing opportunities, better lighting, improved sidewalks and bike lanes. And then as these kind of newer options for getting around, including like e-scooters and e-bikes that are within our region being utilized, making sure that we're addressing some of those safety concerns. And then there was really an identification that there's economic opportunity with improved access to transit, and making sure that we're taking advantage of and consider public-private partnerships, and better addressing the need to ensure access to transit during the development process was one thing noted. Next slide, please. So we lumped these into kind of 3 buckets for the purpose of the discussion today, which include infrastructure improvements, land use and parking policy changes, as well as we're calling programmatic options, which is kind of the new host of travel options that are available. So next slide. On the infrastructure side, we identified over 300 projects specifically around 10 priority stops that we did some more detailed assessment around. And so that included crosswalk opportunities, sidewalk improvements, bike lanes, curb ramps, just making sure that we're addressing all access needs, better wayfinding opportunities, and intersection treatments. Next slide. On land use and parking management, there's some potential policy changes for board consideration, which is considering more transit supportive development, kind of extending what has typically been a quarter mile for the purpose of land use or plan designations for transit-oriented development, for example. And then also just opportunity to incentivize development. So there could be different policy or code changes that could support, increased floor area ratios or higher density development related with different type of zoning applications. And then from a parking standpoint, we've kind of addressed this in prior code changes, but there's other opportunities for like loading zones and curb management that could address some of these other mobility options, including ride hailing and shuttles, as well as car and bike share programs. Next slide. And then there's these potential programs which we're fairly familiar with: transportation demand management. I'll walk through each one of these in the next couple slides, but there's shared mobility as well as the on-demand shuttles. So next slide. Transportation demand management. Yes, I see Catherine here.
Could I interrupt with a key question? In your slides thus far, you've talked about the project purpose, but it hasn't been clear in the topic sheet nor in the presentation of where the locational pertinence of these different strategies. For example, on slide 9, you had a nice graph of different types of improvements, but I'm wondering, so would those be applicable to all of those areas on all Washington County arterials, or would it only apply in the UUAs? Similarly, on slide 8, where you have 3 categories of recommendations, would the geography where those categories apply only be in the UUAs where we have responsibility and authority, or does that pertain countywide? So I didn't quite catch earlier in your presentation the extent of applicability of this study. Could you clarify that for me so I can be on the journey for the rest?
Yes, thank you for that clarifying question. We did look at both urban unincorporated as well as incorporated communities, because we do have arterials and collectors that bisect both areas. So that was an important element of this, was including our city partners as we went through this journey to make sure that they were on board with some of the recommendations. So some of the recommendations do include our city partners, jurisdictional areas as well.
And just to piggyback on that, Deami referenced that we did an initial study of 40 representative transit stops and then narrowed that down to 10 representative major transit stops that could be studied for a variety of improvements and programmatic options. Those crossed unincorporated and city areas because, again, our residents don't necessarily know what jurisdiction they're in. They just know that they want to be able to get to where they need to go.
But through the remainder of this, if there are any suggested policy or investment program choices, all of this information would need to be presented and adopted by each of those city councils as well, right?
It could, if it's something that crosses into a city. So for example, if the county decided that we would like to enact a policy to encourage transportation demand management, because that's the slide that we're on right now, but we want to do that specifically in the Orenco area, we would need to work with City of Hillsborough.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And the stops that we looked at were, as Erin mentioned, representative. And so it was just more of a case study than anything else at this point. And please feel free if any other questions come up to jump in. So the Transportation Demand Management Program, this is a host of strategies that are currently, our key partners like Westside Transportation Alliance is the Transportation Management Association, which provides these services, which are to promote alternatives to driving alone. So from a county standpoint, as the jurisdiction, there are potential opportunities to what we identified, incentivize and or expand these type of programs. Typically, they're provided to major employers, those that have over 100 employees. So there's opportunities to kind of expand the reach of those to perhaps smaller employers, as well as residential programs, which is mainly providing either subsidies or more information about available travel options. Next slide, please. And then shared mobility is kind of it's a broad area, but it generally refers to it's a publicly available shared vehicle. So it could include ride sharing, car sharing, bike share, scooter share. It's companies that are providing these type of vehicles out in the public realm for essentially renting on more of a short-term basis. And our region has all three of these programs in one aspect or another. It's a competitive, and the market is kind of changing fairly rapidly over the last couple of years. So bike and scooter share are most predominantly available in Portland. Car share has kind of come and gone, but we do have some available out in Washington County, and the ride hailing is currently here and being utilized. Some of the key considerations that other jurisdictions have started to address, which is some of the externalities with some of these type of services. Also, just general use of the right-of-way, making sure that the services are safe and accessible to all. And there's concerns potentially about privacy and data management, as well as fair labor practices. So these are being addressed in some extent within the region. Portland is probably at the forefront of addressing some of these issues. Next slide, unless there's any questions. On demand management or on-demand shuttles, this is a type of service that Ride Connection provides to a certain extent. They are shuttles that provide a level of service that, like a fixed transit route, wouldn't be as successful in supporting. So this kind of extends the reach of transit service. And some of the key considerations here is where these services are provided. And so we've done some work to help identify and potentially prioritize where some of these shuttle services could be feasible in the transit development plan that was just adopted. Next slide. So some questions and considerations for the board to discuss potentially here today and or in the future are whether some of these strategies that are presented in the report are worth pursuing and exploring further. From an infrastructure and investment standpoint, we have shared some of the projects that we've identified, for example, with ERMD and their bike and pedestrian projects, safety projects list. So that's already available. Any of our existing infrastructure funding programs could be informed by the projects that we've identified. There's also, as we discussed, whether there's interest in exploring and incentivizing development or modifying parking standards near transit corridors, further exploration on the shared mobility, and then expanded roles for TDM, transportation demand management, and then expanding the planning for shuttles, which is something that we have committed to for the transit development plan. We've already looked at some and we'll continue to do some of that planning over the next couple of years. And then certainly if there are other strategies that warrant consideration. So I think at this point, we open it up to questions and or comments.
Could I ask a clarifying question before we move on?
Of course.
So a big part of the biggest challenge for improving all modes of travel throughout our area boils down to funding. Some of what you've highlighted today through this project is about how practices have continued to evolve over the course of time. But I find myself not able to answer this question for each of these individually because what it doesn't do is also include the challenge of just building complete streets for the current systems that we have. So it's like, why would I want to make the situation worse? Blanket on a whole, as a whole, say, well, go do all of that. And by the way, include these 6 bulleted items as well. So I think, so I'm struggling with that. I realize that you do have a next step slide, but I really also have the burning question of how does this information also leverage all the good work that you all did engaged on the corridor projects for Get Moving 2020? Because after all, our biggest problem comes back to funding for the work needed for our communities and how can we move forward. So I'm really a little bit lost because of all those needs. I need to hear some further clarification on that. And maybe I'm alone in that compared to my 5 colleagues. Oh, I see some head changing, so it sounds like it would be a good time to discuss, get anchored on this.
I think it's probably a good idea to go to the next step slide and talk through some of those items, because I think that gets to the root of what I'm hearing from you, which is this concern about, well, what does this mean for the funding that we have? And I think our next steps talk about some of these upcoming projects and how it will inform some of our funding allocation conversations. So Kevin, could you go to the next slide? Diami, do you want to go ahead and talk through this?
Sure. Yeah, and I'll just add that in the report, we acknowledge that there is kind of a phased or dependencies because we really do need that basic infrastructure in place before you can provide like scooter or bike share, for example. And So the report tries to outline and detail kind of what those dependencies are, as well as from a kind of suitability standpoint where those make sense. But in terms of what we identify for some next steps, there's the acknowledgement. And then to your point, we do have some near-term programs that this will help kind of give us an opportunity to further explore and expand on the work that we've done here through the countywide transit study, which we anticipate kicking off later this year. There are some programs that partners are leading, for example, TriMet's red line extension and looking at the different station areas. And so there's an opportunity to think about access improvements. And then TB Highway Corridor, Metro is leading a grant to look at the transit, kind of a preferred alternative for transit within that corridor. And then the infrastructure programs that we have, the funding programs. So there's MISTIP 3F that I believe will be kicking off this year, and other, our transportation development tax project list, for example, could be informed by this work. And then if so directed, we can continue to explore some of these strategies through future work program.
Well, I'll just say it only got murkier for me because there are some next steps that I would like to see here, and that is review with our city jurisdictional partners and all those elected bodies. It isn't clear to me at all how this countywide transit study has any relation to the fact that we just completed the Southwest Corridor plan and got that all packaged up. And so now I'm like, well, wait a second. As you talked about parking strategy and land use, where does that leave us? So I'm nothing if not more confused. I understand that you're proposing that we acknowledge the report and essentially accept it in a couple of weeks' time, but that doesn't say, yes, move forward with all these recommendations. So count me needing some further clarity before I'm able to do that. So, but that's just me as one of five. I'm interested in hearing what my fellow colleagues have to say as well, and to learn from them.
So I think two things to keep in mind with this study, the two important outcomes of it, for me anyway, thinking about prioritizing projects, is this inventory of where we have gaps. And that's really informative as we go forward with identifying where we need to prioritize our limited funds. So that's a GIS tool that we have available now. We can make available to anyone who wants to review that. It's a really useful but very technical tool. The second outcome of this work is essentially a toolkit. And that toolkit can be used by us, it can be used by our jurisdictional partners, it can be used by the nonprofit partner agencies as well. I have a transit station, I would like to, or I have a large employer site, I would like to make it easier for people to use transit. What are some potential options for me? And that's something they can refer back to this toolkit to find out about these different programmatic options. In addition to some of these other policy discussions about things like development around transit stations. And so I think it's really good technical information, but as a standalone product, I think you're right. It's a little bit, well, it's a lot of good information, but how do we use that? So it's important to think about these next studies coming up and how we needed this baseline information in order to go forward with these other projects.
So in essence, Erin, if I understand, it's not necessarily changing I'm not hearing policy changes, right?
Right.
I'm hearing implementation tools. That's great. Good clarity. Thank you. but also in that implementation, it's saying that we'll be able to better apply the investment decisions that we as a board and or local jurisdictions would make, but it doesn't make those investment decisions.
Absolutely, right.
Okay, I better understand now. Thank you. Colleagues, thoughts, questions? Did you follow all of that as well?
I appreciate the, excuse me. I was just going to say, I appreciate the clarity from Erin and Demi. I understand what your, what the report is, but it really does help to have the clarity about where we are in relationship to policy decisions. So thank you.
My comment is that this is probably one of the most difficult topics that everybody around the region is dealing with. I mean, it continues to say we have a spine, which we call a mass transit system, but how does one get there, and how do we get from point A to point B within transit stops? I guess I'm unclear, since everybody's struggling with the same issues, what's this all going to cost? And I know you haven't fragmented that out, but there are so many pots of different money that we all try to access, whether that be regional money, whether that be state money, whether that be our MSTIP money, and there's lots of different money. Have you got some kind of funding thoughts in your mind as to how much this is going to cost, what you're going to tackle first, and where those monies are going to come from?
Well, I think that this provides us with, again, the data that we need as we're informing those funding decisions. It's not so much that it gave us a prioritized list of what we would fund first. That's a decision we would come back to the board with through these various funding programs that we have. So I think it's really informative going into the conversations about MSTIP in particular. Were the board to say, we would like to prioritize improvements around transit stations or major transit stations, then we would be able to say, and here's a list of those projects, and here's how much that's going to cost.
I'll just add this comment, Erin. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I quite frankly, station areas are probably the most important, and those that are things that are joining them. I mean, I understand we all need to, heaven knows, we need more transit in my district as well, but if you get too far out, it's very difficult in terms of these kinds of mobility choices you're making. So I would be looking more at what can we possibly do to make this better so that the system's used, because if it's not used, and it's not being effective, and we really need to get people to it. So
yeah, Commissioner Rogers, thank you, because what you've raised has furthered my understanding. So I think, if I'm right, Erin, we as a board need to acknowledge this report, because after all, it was funded through a TGM grant. And one of the requirements often for the final disbursement of such grant funding is the acceptance and adoption by the local elected body. So that's what you're recommending, but as you've correctly, or I now understand, you stated previously, is it really is a set of technical information, the inventory and gaps, that GIS information you talked about, and the second is the toolkit for programmatic options. So in acknowledging it and accepting it, we are enabling you to finish the project, to get the final disbursement of the TGM funds, and continue to look at the application of these technical techniques as we move forward collectively in investing in improved transportation and transit projects throughout our community. Am I getting this right finally?
Yes, that is right.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was so slow on that, but now I understand. Other commissioners, Commissioner Fye?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Great presentation. And I think I was during the snow time, so I really appreciate the final report and It was a great thing to do while it snowed outside. I think one thing to acknowledge the final report, it's also important to acknowledge that I didn't get a sense of community voices or input into the report. I did see some of the community summits and things that happened and in the reports and the final findings. Yeah, and even including, you know, the survey, 300 people taking the survey. I think it's important that we can acknowledge the report, but also set aside another mass, you know, critical community engagement in this, because as we know, people who are going to be accessing the transit or who we want to utilize the shared mobility would be communities who are utilizing transportation and depend on public transportation, or maybe have like one personal vehicles and use other ways to get around, whether for shopping or to their work or to parks. So I just wanted to flag that for the team. While I appreciated the report, I really do think that we need to go back to the community and ask critical questions around equity. I also didn't see key phrases called out, like wheelchair accessibility in the report, and I think it's worth calling out when we're thinking about transportation, how we could really make it accessible to everyone. The question I had, and this might be, I'm coming in the conversation later since the board was able to get some briefings ahead of time on this topic and board presentation as well. I was wondering if, you know, in the report, from my understanding, if the county owned or have jurisdictional control over transit access routes. I think it just thinking about some of the investments we're going to make. And then I also had, as well as everyone else who expressed, you know, the sense of the economic and as well as the travel impacts associated, not only the project, but I'm more interested in the shared mobility piece, and what would be the travel and the economic impact, as well as the larger. And then also, I think policy question number 2, some of the questions you asked, incentivize development near transit. I didn't get from the report, I didn't get a list of developments potential or even now happening in around some of the areas that we're prioritizing to consider. So I would have liked to see what are the developments happening nearby or could be happening in the future, so that we can align and really mobilize the community to get involved and have a stake in recreating or creating something new for their community.
Thank you for your comments and questions. I was trying to jot them down. I might have missed some specific questions, but one I wanted to answer was regarding county jurisdiction or control of transit routes. Our transit service in Washington County generally runs along our larger arterials, and those are generally under county jurisdiction. So we do have a fairly large responsibility for how people are able to access transit in the county. And I think that's why having this inventory is really useful as we go into the major street improvement program projects this year and thinking about how we want to prioritize that program going forward. And then on the question about equity and outreach to the community, I'd like to ask Yami to clarify a little bit on that one, the membership of our technical advisory committee and how we disseminated information about our online open house, just because I think it's interesting information. This was an interesting project to do. There was a lot of community interest in it. We had a lot of interest from our jurisdictional partners because they wanted to learn from it as well, and be able to use these outcomes. So it was certainly an ongoing conversation, and that's something we'd always like to be able to do a better job with. So Diami, do you want to jump in and share a little more information there?
Sure. Yeah, the online open house was circulated through kind of our traditional communications approaches through the county as well as through our partners. We convened the community stakeholder workshop, where it was an open invitation that was sent out through various interested parties list that we provide, that we have available, and had a good conversation there. I think to your note that this is really kind of the beginning of the conversation in many respects on many fronts. And so certainly more engagement will be necessary as we, if there's to be any kind of further pursuit of some of these programmatic approaches. Well noted.
And our online open house was available fully in Spanish. We mirrored Spanish and English versions of the online open house, and it was promoted in Spanish as well. And then membership on the Technical Advisory Committee, Diami, also included representatives from Health and Human Services, as well as, I believe, Central Cultural was on that committee.
That's correct.
And a lot of overlap from the project team between this project and the transit development plan as well. So I can really see how that was very helpful.
We have certainly built some really good relationships through these two projects, and I think you're right, there's a good synergy between them.
Any other commissioner questions at this point or comments? Go ahead, Stephen.
Make sort of a quick concluding comment. Yeah, I really appreciate the discussion and the input we received here today. So thank you very much. I do think this is a really great piece of foundational work. Like Erin and Diami were saying, this will really help us as we enter into a variety of decision-making processes coming up. So this is excellent foundational work, and we have a lot more work to do ahead of us. But in terms of thinking about how we prioritize funding around access to transit, and then just having that better baseline data is really going to be helpful as we go through those processes. So the team's done a really nice job, and I do appreciate all the work that we've our teams put into this, and our community members too that participated.
Can I ask one last question?
Of course.
And that is, I don't know if you've already highlighted this to the main body of WCCC, right? I know you're very engaged with WCCC Tech, the technical folks, but I want to make sure that our elected partners at Maine WCCC are aware of this. Have you already done that, or will this be coming to them?
We did a briefing for WCCC, I think, a year ago when we had our first board briefing. Am I right about that, Diami? Well, we can confirm if we did.
Yeah, because now you have it done, right?
Now we have it done, and it's the right time to go back and start to think about these other conversations. And you're right, as I said, the mayors and other electeds have been very interested in this work, and so it's the right time to take it back to them.
Awesome, thank you. But we need to make sure we acknowledge it so that you can get paid for the work you've already done. And then we can utilize all these technical findings for all of these projects you have listed out now in the next steps. Great. Okay, anything else, commissioners, on this topic? Great, I think we're done. Thank you very much, team. It's now almost 10 minutes past the hour. We have a lunch hour. We do have some outside speakers for our returning topic. So I would ask my colleagues, is it okay if we convene at 1 o'clock? Slightly shorter lunch break. Terrific. All righty then. We'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. Have a good lunch, everyone. Bye-bye.
Is this the same, Kevin? No. Could you send it to me on Teams?
Yeah, Commissioner Fye, it will be, I'll send you the